Hello. Okay. Good afternoon. Very nice to be here this 2 days for the Sola Forum. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here. I want to speak about the situation in Belgium, which of course is a very different context. But I will try to bring some links here and there to Georgia, and you will see that even though the context is very different, there are things we can learn from each other. As you see on the second slide, I want to speak shortly about Belgium. I have it here, this thing. Perfect, thank you. Yeah. So I'll start by saying a little bit about Belgium itself and the religious affiliation in Belgium, and that Belgium is a legal state, secular state. Then speak about religion-state relations and the provisions. And I will speak about one very specific change of law in Flanders, which I think is quite worrying, and then draw some conclusions. This is Belgium, located in Western Europe, a country that became independent in 1830, so not even 200 years. In size, it's about half, a bit smaller than half of Georgia, but Belgium has about 11 million inhabitants, which is quite a bit more. It's a very complicated country in state structure. We have different regions and communities. In total, 6 governments that lead federally or on the different levels. And I will focus on the northern part on Flanders later in the paper. When we think about religious affiliation, there is no official counting of religious presence in Belgium. But there has been a study, the European Value Study in 2009, which gives, I think, still the best figures. And if it is asked to Belgians, to which religious denomination do you belong, then 43% says no religion, no denominational affiliation. About 50% of the population self-identify as Catholic, but it must be said that the large majority of those I would think should be considered cultural Catholic. So it's not that they would go to church regularly, they just call themselves Catholic because Belgium is historically a Catholic country. And then there were a few small minorities, Muslims 3%, Protestants, evangelical about 1%, Orthodox half a percentage, and Jews and some other believers as well, but these are very small. Belgium clearly is what we call a secular state, and of course it's a difficult term, secular. I mean the following things. First, the process of secularization is very far, which means a process of differentiation of different spheres in society. That means that religion has no say anymore about topics such as politics, about medicine, about art, about culture, about science. Yeah? Religion is one part of how society is organized. It's no longer a sacred canopy, something that brings everything together. Charles Taylor, the Canadian philosopher, says that a secular society is a society in which non-belief is among the life options. So it is possible to be a non-believer, right? There are many places, and there has long been the situation in which that was simply not possible. Everybody believed. But he says this is an option, not to be a believer. And this is, I would say, in Belgium today, as a secular state, the norm. Not believing in anything is actually the norm. And therefore, religion has a very limited role in society and in politics and in people's lives. When we think about the political situation in Belgium and the legal situation, the human rights framework is the framework. There's no discussion about that. Everybody will say that everything legal needs to be measured by human rights. But then you would expect that religious freedom of religion and belief, is self-evident there. Of course there must be religious freedom because this is part of the human rights framework. But my answer will be, after this presentation, no, it's not that simple. Religious freedom must always be guarded by state actors, by NGOs, by legal experts, by religious communities, etc. because also secularity, being a secular state, is not a guarantee for religious freedom. About religion in the Belgian constitution. Belgium is independent since 1830, and we had our first constitution in 1831. This was a modern compromise between liberals and Catholics in Belgium. They were the two big forces at the time. But it must be understood, I will say more about it in a minute, in the context of the preceding era, of course. And that was the time of Napoleon and also of the Dutch occupation or the Dutch rule. Napoleon in 1850 was, how do you call it, beaten in Waterloo, which is close to Brussels in Belgium. But during his rule over a large portion of Europe, he confiscated church properties. And we heard about this practice in the paper of Tinatin, which happened here as well in the Soviet regime. Napoleon did the same. He took away all the church properties, but in exchange for that, he said, I will give salaries to the pastors and the imams and the priests, etc. When Belgium became independent in 1830, they did not give back properties. They said, yeah, let us keep this system of state support, but these properties we just keep as a Belgian state. That was their smart policy, of course. And for a long time, this has functioned quite well. There was and there still is support for religion in Belgium, but there is this historical reason for that. It was originally grounded in the fact that the Catholic property was taken away from the church by the state. And later on, the possibility of support was also given to other religious communities, and I will say more about that. In the Constitution, in the Belgian Constitution, religious freedom is very present. It speaks about the freedom of religious belief and expression and adherence, but it also speaks of freedom from religious belief. You cannot be forced to believe something. Believing is guaranteed, and your freedom to be atheist is also guaranteed. Article 21 of the Constitution implicitly mentions the non-interference of the state in religious matters. The state cannot interfere in matters that are religiously located. There is strong freedom of education, which means that there are many confessional schools in Belgium. I think about 70% of education in Belgium, secondary school education, is still in the hands of Catholic schools. Catholic schools are still the large majority of education in Belgium. And there is also the possibility of subsidies from the state for recognized religious communities. And this is what I will focus on in the rest of my presentation. And I will first read to you this article in the Constitution. It's Article 181. And this says, and I quote, "The salaries and pensions of ministers of religion are paid for by the state, the amount required or charged annually to the budget. The salaries and pensions of representatives of organizations recognized by the law as providing moral assistance, according to a non-denominational philosophical concept, are paid for by the state." So the state pays for salaries for pastors and for also non-confessional counselors, so they can have a state salary. But you need to be member of a recognized religion, and the local community needs to be recognized as well. Which religions are recognized? The Catholic religion, Protestant or evangelical religion, Israelite religion, that's Judaism, Anglican religion, Islamic religion, non-confessional humanism, and Orthodox religion. All of these religions are recognized, and Buddhism also gets some support. But as I said, a local community needs to have a second degree recognition. A local faith community, a parish, needs to have a local recognition as well. What's the advantage of being recognized by the state for these religions? For the religions, it means that they have time on television paid by the state. Not in Flanders anymore, but in the rest of the country. There are chaplaincies in the army and in prison paid by the state, and there is this possibility of religious-based education in schools. For a local community, a parish or a mosque, it means that the salaries and the pensions can be paid by the state. The housing of the ministers are paid by the local municipalities. And if there are financial problems in a church or in a mosque, they can go to the local administration and ask for financial assistance, also in view of buildings, etc. So that's quite an advantage of being recognized as a local community. And in total, I will not go into the details, but this whole support system brings about, or costs the state about 642 million euro per year, or about 1.7 billion lari per year, which is 0.5% of the Belgian government budget. So there is quite some money that is related to this. Still, this is, and that if you look at the communities that are recognized, then there are a large majority Catholic communities because of the Catholic history, right? 1,593 in Flanders, Protestant evangelicals 47, 27 mosques are recognized, 16 Orthodox parishes, 7 Anglican parishes, and 6 Israelite synagogues have this local recognition, and thus a pastor or a imam or a priest, whatever, paid by the state. But this is a system in which the state decides on the politics. The public financing is not organized on the basis of agreements. It rests on an act of the federal legislature. It's called recognition, which means the state decides the rules. It's not something that they discuss with the communities, and they can change it. And this is what I want to tell a bit about. In 2021, that's about 1 year ago, in Flanders, new requirements were made for the recognition of a local church. If you were recognized, then you could get all these advantages. But what are the rules for that? And this was changed in Flanders. The minister said, we need to have these rules to separate the wheat from the chaff, the good ones from the bad ones. Actually saying, the good ones are communities paid for by the state, the bad ones are the ones that are not paid, which is actually an insult and a judgment over more than 1,000 religious communities. Many evangelical, Pentecostal, but also Islamic communities have no recognition, and sometimes they don't want it. But the government considers them then actually to be bad communities. What do they require for recognition now? You need to have a local juridical structure, and your representative organ, so that means the national organ, needs to approve of your local community. You need to be transparent in all juridical structures and financial movements. So you need to be open on all of your finances as a faith community if you want to have this recognition. You need to be independent financially since at least 4 years. You cannot have foreign financing that might compromise your independence. And you need to make a list, a register of all gifts of more than 1,000 euro per year. Now that sounds like a lot of money in Georgian terms, but an average family, a Christian family or an Islamic family, will be on this list. In my church, most families will give more than 1,000 euro per year to the church. So we would have to make a list, a public list of all people giving money to the church. There are also requirements regarding community and society. They need to demonstrate societal relevance, which means they need to have at least 200 members and good relations with the local government, and also good neighborship and sustainable relations with the local community. So the government will want to check if your relationship with the community is good. But as you know, for example, Islam is not much appreciated in Belgium. There are many people who are anti-Islamic. How can they make a good relationship with the neighborhood if the neighborhood doesn't want them? Still, they are the ones who would be judged by the government for not having a good relationship with their neighbors. And third, there are requirements regarding the community, local community, and the law. They are not allowed, the community as board, so the leadership of the church has the duty not to cooperate in activities that might lead to discrimination, hate, or violence. So if in your preaching you are, for example, saying something about, or you're not supporting gay marriage, for example, a typical topic, that might be considered as something that might lead to discrimination. And then the question is, can a church or a mosque still have a prophetic voice in society? That's a question that I think these churches need to struggle with. Not only are the rules changed, the minister also said, I will set up an agency for information and screening. This sounds familiar to the Georgian situation, I think. This agency, the minister said, will be one of the most performant inspection services of our Flemish administration. So the most performant inspection in Belgium now, in Flanders now, will be inspection of religious communities. Not tax evasion or other things, not schools, but religious communities will be sharply evaluated. In the new legislation, it is said that their main task is to control, and they have 19 full-time equivalents, people working for them, right? Which means, as you remember, there are less than 2,000 communities, religious communities recognized in Belgium. So they have plenty of time to do that. And they have a budget of about 3 million euro per year, which means they can spend about 1,750 euro per community per year in controlling them. They have 4,800 lari per year just to control one community, and one, and one, and one. Which means they can control almost 90% of the communities on an annual basis. And I think in this regard, that's a very far-reaching power that's been given to this agency. What can they do? They are allowed, according to the law now, to visit places of worship without warning. They can walk in during a service. That is part of what they are allowed to do. They have full access to all spaces. They can enter into all the rooms in your building. They can do an identity control of all people who are present. They can interrogate people at that very moment. They have access to all documents and can take copies. And if they think it's necessary, they can ask the police to join them. Now, this agency is now being developed. So we don't know how it will go. Maybe they will be very polite and they will call beforehand and say, can we please come and visit you and look into your financial documents? That's possible. It's also possible that they come on a Friday evening during a mosque service and start interrogating people. We don't know how they will react. If they find faults with a local community, they can limit or freeze the financial consequences. They can freeze the recognition of this community, or they can cancel the recognition. And in this way, I think they really want to have the possibility of full control of local communities. And of course, in their reasoning, they will say, we give you money, we need to be able to control what you do with the money, right? So, to summarize, conclusion, in Belgium, a secular country, religious freedom is well integrated in the constitution, and even state support for religion exists since 1830. But the place for religion in society is under constant discussion, as is also state support for religion, of course. Not everybody is happy with the fact that there is support for religion, of course. The Flemish government recently established a strict regime for support for religious communities, and this now also implies far-reaching control and intrusion in personal matters. So, to conclude, and this is, I think, a comparison, but also a mirror for the Georgian situation, a very secular context, as Belgium is, does not guarantee strong religious freedom. Religious freedom must always be guarded by state actors, by NGOs, by legal experts, by religious communities, etc. Thank you for your attention.
Please.
დიდი მადლობა ინფორმაციისათვის. დიდი მადლობა ინფორმაციისათვის. ძალიან მოულოდნელი იყო ესეთი მკაცრი რეგულაციები. ბელგიაში ნამდვილად არ მოველოდი. მე მაქვს ორი შეკითხვა. პირველი შეკითხვა ასეთი არის, ეს რეგისტრირებული recognized ეკლესიები რომელიც არის და რომელსაც აქვს ეს პრივილეგიები სახელმწიფოსაგან, დაფინანსება, ხელფასი თუ იქ ტელევიზიის დრო და რაღაც ისტორიულ კონტექსტში, ანუ რამდენად დადებითად მოქმედებს ეს ეკლესიებზე, მსახურებზე, ეხმარება ეს ევანგელიზაციას და ხალხში სახარების გავრცელებას თუ უფრო აზარმაცებს ღმერთის მსახურებს, ეს ერთი კითხვა და მეორე დაუშვათ რელიგიურმა ორგანიზაციამ ვერ დააკმაყოფილა ის მოთხოვნები, რაც აქვს ამ ჩვენებურ სააგენტოს და შეუჩერა ეს recognition რაც არის. მაშინ ეს შეუძლია რომ არარეგისტრირებულად იმოქმედოს ამ სიკეთეების გარეშე სახელმწიფოსი თუ უნდა დაიშალოს. მადლობთ.
Okay, thank you for your question. My focus of my research was on evangelical communities. In the 90s, they were struggling with this question. Do we want to be in this regime of recognition or not? And they explicitly wanted it, not for the money originally, but they wanted to have access to media for evangelization, and they wanted to have access to Protestant religious education in schools. That's what they wanted. So they wanted to use it for spreading the gospel in society and to their children. And they were at that time positive. But then the question came, do we also want money for our local churches then? Because the option is there as well. And the decision was made in the end, this is free church thinking, every local church can choose. So at this time there are in Flanders about 17, I think, evangelical churches which have a pastor paid by the state. Can they use it still for evangelization and for preaching freely? Yes, they can. And they do. The churches that I know who have this recognition have not become liberal or careful or anything. But this change of law is very new. And the question is, what will happen? If there will come regular inspection, people checking on sermons, etc., which is legally possible now, then I think some of these churches will withdraw and they will be non-recognized. If the state doesn't interfere actually, but just wants to check, for example, your bookkeeping and your finances, then I think these churches will stay in the regime. If you are not recognized, that doesn't mean, and this is the crazy thing of this, it doesn't mean that you are limited in any ways. The whole system actually is based on a fear of Muslim extremism. They say we don't want to support mosques that might have extremist ideas that lead to violence. That's the background. But if a mosque is recognized and has extremist ideas, the simplest thing they can do is get out of the recognition, and then there is no control or anything possible anymore. The control is linked to the financing. And that's the weird situation. Yeah. Thank you. Did I answer your question? Okay.
Please.
მადლობა საინტერესო მოხსენებისთვის. აი თქვენ ახსენეთ გამჭვირვალობის საკითხი. რომელიც ძალიან მნიშვნელოვანია. აი როგორი მექანიზმი არსებობს ამ გამჭვირვალობის? აი საქართველოში მაგალითად 25 მილიონს ვუხდით საქართველოს მართლმადიდებელ ეკლესიას ბიუჯეტიდან, თუმცა ეს თანხები რაში ხარჯება, ჩვენ ამაზე წვდომა არ გვაქვს და არც გამჭვირვალობა არ არსებობს. აი რა მექანიზმი არსებობს, თუნდაც აი ჩვეულებრივმა მოქალაქემ რომ გაარკვიოს ბიუჯეტიდან მიღებული დაფინანსებას კონკრეტული კონფესია რა მიმართულებით ხარჯავს. მადლობა.
Yeah. You mean the government money, you mean? Yes. So what the government does with the money that they get for this agency, for example. Yeah. So the parliament, of course, has the possibility to check on all these things, right? So the parliament has access to what is going on in the different agencies of the country. So on paper and in principle, this can be checked and will be checked. I don't have doubt in this regard. But the problem is, if you speak about what exactly goes wrong, no, let me turn it around. Some mosques have already lost their recognition. And if in the parliament, parliamentarians ask what was wrong with this mosque, they would say extremism. Yes, but what was wrong? Can you give details? Then they say classified, state security. And you know, so the financial running of the thing, I have no worries about. I think it can be checked. But how they will check on religions and religious activity, this is something I'm very hesitant about. I don't think that they will be open and transparent in that. And you can say it may also be good, you know, that they don't bring out the dirty stuff from a faith community. But now they are ostracized. They are really negatively labeled without explaining why. And I've heard Islamic leaders who said, this is just not fair. I have no chance to defend myself. I'm just being pushed aside without any communication. No.
Questions from chat?
There's a question. Are there already religious communities who think about or decided to give up the state financial help in order to stay truly independent? I think the person means after the new law came out.
Yes, thank you. Not that I know of. I have no knowledge of any religious communities yet that decided to give up because of the legislation. Everyone, like the national leaders that I speak with, they say we need to see how this law will be implemented. And as long as we don't see what's going on. No. But I recently met the leader of this agency. I met him, I sat next to him by accident in a meeting like this. And I talked with him shortly. And he indicated that he actually doesn't know anything about religion. He says, I don't know what the difference is between Catholic and Orthodox and Protestant. I have no idea. But he is supposed to do this control. And these things, that worries me. Yeah. So I'm not optimistic. But I have not heard yet of churches who already, or communities who already withdrew. No.
Thanks. I too have one question. I think more general about secularism or secularity. Can you talk about secularism or secularity as universal principle, at least for Europe? More specifically, is there any universal definition of it, or if it differs regarding society and state, religion, or culture and politics? As for me, for example, secularism is a separation of private and public spheres, issues or phenomena. How can you answer this question?
Thank you. Yes, that's a very difficult question because many different answers have been given to it already. I think it is wise to speak of secularisms, multiple secularisms. There are different ways in which, and this general thing I think everybody agrees on, this differentiation between private and public, differentiation of religion, politics, law, science, etc. I think everybody agrees that something like that must be considered secularism. But how it plays out exactly is very different. And for me, in Western Europe, a nice example to use is exactly also the country of Georgia and the often used term of a post-Soviet context. Soviet also meant that there is a differentiation between church and state in a way, but it wasn't secularism in Western understanding. So it's very difficult to say what exactly it means. And I think, on the one hand, it is good that that such developments are different in different regions because different cultures and different historical backgrounds. On the other hand, there needs to be also something universal in view of being able to speak about universal norms, such as human rights. And that's, as you know, a very difficult topic. To what extent can you say human rights are universal? To what extent are they part of secular culture? To what extent are they Western rooted and even Christian rooted? That's a difficult question to which I don't have the answer, sorry.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Creemers.
Thank you.
Get